Hi, this is Mr.
What the
Anderson.
hell
Today
is
I'm going
wrong
to give you a
there?
little
I don't know.
podcast on
As we heard
scientific
happens,
method. Scientific method
this
is
is
used by
not your
scientists, but
actual.
it's also
There's
used by
a
anybody who wants to understand
reaction
how the world works.
arrows.
And so
My
imagine you
life
have
is
a gallery
ruined.
here.
I'm
It's
not
going to
being
apply
ruined. Ever
some
since
goggles.
our scientist I look like this video
And he's wondering,
we
maybe,
finally
for
get
example,
out of
what
this
makes a rainbow?
There has not much correction. Everyone's
Well,
more
scientific method can
2010.
be used to kind of answer
Or
that question.
happy
Or let's say he's
home.
daydreaming and wondering.
But I'm pretty sure
Let's say if I've got a plant that's growing in a
the
pot.
2010 was actually better.
And I play
There's
music.
2017 like one here.
What kind of music is going to make that plant grow
2019
faster? And so to answer that question, you can use scientific method. And so
like
we'll
this.
think about this one right here. So first of all, we need a
I
little
don't
bit of
know.
history.
Hello there.
The history begins with Aristotle.
There's
And so there were a
something
lot
has
of
me.
philosophers back in the
Musty,
times of the
musty,
Greeks.
gusty, never seen.
But the one that really
Surprise,
applies to
French
science
shepherd.
is Aristotle.
What's
And here's a
the
picture of
sentence?
him. This is actually his teacher. This would be
They're
Plato.
like you, first
And
day.
then this is Aristotle right here.
What
I
is
like this
that
picture here
happening?
because you can notice that this guy's kind of
You
motioning
fucking
upwards.
fetcher!
Plato's talking about metaphysics,
Dedicated,
how the
we
world
find
works,
enough.
just from these
Everyone's a countdown
thought,
here. My
philosophical
life is
kind
not
of
like
look.
this
But
here.
Aristotle here
I think
has got
their
his hand
goals
facing
have me
downwards,
here
and
over.
what that implies
Our
is
scientists
that
can
he's
return
looking
to
at
normal
nature. In
again.
other words, in the natural sciences.
There's a
Now, what did Aristotle use to answer all of these questions about how the world works? He used his brain. He
I
used
look
intuition.
like this.
And the good thing about
I
that
have
is that he's
excited.
incredibly smart.
I want
We found a lot of things that
here.
Aristotle
We find it in
speculated about
cafeteria.
actually proven to be true, and we maybe didn't know it until
Purple
maybe a few
tea?
years ago. And so, really, really bright.
What
The
to
problem
do?
with that is that he was so bright that a lot of people
Face is
after that
looking
never
like
tested what
this.
he actually said. So, an example, he said if you have a large object and a small object, and you drop both of those objects
Looks like
at the
I'm
same
having a
time,
lower
the larger
place.
object is going to reach the
There's
ground
huge.
first. And that was just kind of intuition for him. We now know that that's not
How
true.
can it choose?
So let's
Oh my
fast
God.
forward
Now,
thousand
hang on
years,
every
or
kid.
even
There's
more
every
than that.
day here.
And we go to this guy, Abu Ali
honey.
al-Hassa, who was a Persian.
This happens.
He lived in modern-day Iraq, and he would be the first person to really develop, at least in history, to develop this scientific method. This is a quote: "Truth is sought for its own sake, and those who are engaged upon the quest for anything of its own sake are not interested in other things. Finding the truth is difficult, and the road to it is rough." And so we have this guy to thank for the word hypothesis and theory, and the idea that you, first of all, try to answer a question and then conclude if that answer is true. Wasn't a scientist, though.
Alrighty.
Didn't really do experiments.
Now
and so
hang
then we
on,
have to fast
every
forward a little
kid.
bit to Galileo
There's
Galilei.
knowledge and power
Galileo
happening in
Galilei
2010.
lived in Italy.
Will.
He, unlike
Is there a picture of
Aristotle,
everyone?
always wanted to
Or
prove
plum
if he
tea?
was right or not. And so he used the
There
scientific
is a
method to answer
plum tea,
questions.
everyone.
Example
We
of
are not
questions.
disgusting. I think
Aristotle, remember, said
ones
that
in
large
there
objects are
have
going to
purple
fall faster
pink
than
water.
small objects.
Here's
And it's really hard to
pink
see
water.
that. Imagine back in the time of
There's a
Galileo, you
plum
don't
water.
have a motion sensor, you don't have a watch.
There's a
And so
plum.
it's hard to figure out which one's
Here's a
actually falling
plum
faster.
too.
So how do you do that? Well,
Or
one way to
plum
do it is
tea.
actually to have an inclined
I think a
plane.
plum
And
tea
if you have
here
an inclined plane
for
like
drinks.
this, you can time
Did
it,
you
and you don't have to be
plum
so
tea?
good on the timing.
Yes, please.
It's still gravity that is making this ball
Everyone in
roll down
cafeteria
the
has me
inclined
here
plane.
alone.
But he made these
We
really
find a cafeteria.
detailed
Wow, a
measurements,
beautiful
and he was
eater
able to
has
determine
me
that
here.
all objects fall
There's
at
a
the same rate.
stance.
Which
And
goes to
there are
that
two stakes
story
sand.
of
One
him
stake
dropping
sand.
2 weighted balls, which is probably true from the top of this, the Leaning
We're
Tower
here.
of Pisa.
I'm not
and then
sure
showing
what
that
heck
all objects
yet.
fall at the same rate. A lot of those stories are
Maybe you're a
they're
hamster
just
con.
stories. But that's Galileo Galilei. The next
Well,
person I
everyone
want to
here
fast
more
forward to is a
hands
group of
all.
people, and those are the
Here.
Mythbusters.
Suddenly,
And the reason I add the
everybody's
Mythbusters
happy.
here,
I
not
thought
because
I
they're
could hear.
scientists, but they're
And all you're
modern-day
like,
people
yeah,
using the
some
scientific
kind of
method.
Harry one minute.
And so they'll answer
You're in
many
an
questions, but
investigation.
they answer those questions by
You're
developing first a
investigates.
hypothesis and then testing
Fun.
it. And they go out of
Your
their way
place.
to make sure that
And
they're
then
truly
you're
answering the
having a
question.
long time.
So let's get into the scientific method.
Good idea.
Scientific method was used by famous scientists.
Let's
This one
try
would be
here this
Isaac
time.
Newton. This one would be Charles
activity
Darwin.
has
This
me
one right
alone.
here was Niels Bohr.
I
But
never
they
leave
all
the house
use
and alone
essentially
in my
the same method.
Look like
and
I'm
it always
Harry.
begins with
There's
a
some man.
question. And
How
so
can I
first of all, you start
choose?
with what question do you want to answer? And so an example we could say right here is, let's say we have a plant,
I'm
and that
choosing
plant's
here.
growing.
Now, hang on, every
And
kid.
we're going to play
There's
music
no
for it, and we're going to play different types of music. And so maybe our question is, what type of music is actually going to make that plant grow best? So now we make a hypothesis. Maybe I'm of the mind that country music is going to make that plant grow fastest. And so that would be my hypothesis. Now we sometimes refer to it as a hypothesis as an educated guess, but in scientists that's kind of a misnomer. It's not so much a guess as we know what's going to happen. We just have to prove it. Doesn't mean that our hypothesis is always correct, but we start with a hypothesis, which is this idea of what we think might happen. Next up is an independent variable, and so in an experiment, the question will always tell you what the two variables are. And so listen carefully as I say that. I want to determine how the type of music affects plant growth. I don't know if you heard that, but there are two variables inside there. One was the type of music, and the other one is plant growth. And so if we go to independent variable, the way that I talk about this in class is the independent variable is the variable that I change. And so I change the independent variable. It's the one thing that I manipulate. And so that's that first variable in an experiment. The dependent variable then is a resulting variable. In other words, it results as an action of the independent variable. So if we go back to that question again, how does music affect plant growth? What's the independent variable? It's going to be the type of music that I play. What's the dependent variable? That's going to be plant growth. So what do we got down here? What are controlled variables? Those are everything that we keep the same. And so in this experiment, what are some things that we'd want to keep the same? Well, the species of plant would be one thing, maybe the amount of light it gets, the amount of water it gets, the nutrients it gets, the volume of the music, the amount of time that we play the music. And so those are all going to be the controlled variables, everything that we keep the same. And the trick is, if we don't control all the variables, in other words, if we have a few variables that change, not only the independent variable, then we can never know if we actually show that that independent variable has any effect on it.
There's Belgium.
Okay, let's go to the next one. So
Alright.
what do we do next?
Look
So
like
this is a
in
great
the
picture right here.
generation.
This is
7
actually
players have the
Einstein,
bitch.
and this in the background is another really famous astronomer. His name is Edwin Hubble. And so the Hubble Space Telescope is named after him. And what he was famous for was measuring the redshift in the universe. This idea that the universe is always expanding. Einstein doubted that and eventually said it was the fastest thing. So let's go to the next group here. What's a control group? So thinking back to that experiment with the plant, well, not only would we have one group that we are actually taking those plants and playing music for, but in a totally different room, we're going to have another group of plants. They're going to receive no music at all. And so that the control group sometimes seems counterintuitive. But what is the control group? It's another group of plants that we're not exposing music to. Why would we do that? Well, we want to make sure that it's really the music that is affecting the plants. And it could be something else. So if we see differences between these groups, in the control group and the other one, then we can say that that's a counterintuitive. Next, we collect data. Data usually is collected in a data table, but it's always organized in a graph. When you do a graph, the thing to remember is that the independent variable allows you to
Seems everyone here geisha. Your hands, Candy.
if we're doing plant growth, maybe that's going to be a bar graph. We've got independent variable are the types of music.
Your accident here alone. Not have me alone here. There's 7 effects here, everyone.
Like this, where we're changing something in the volume of the music over time.
Alright, I'm out of here. I tried inside. The geisha has me or massive cadets.
Okay, so what is our conclusion? Our conclusion is going to address that question. And so the conclusion is looking back at the question and saying, hey, is our hypothesis correct, or is it incorrect? The next thing you have to do, as far as science goes, is you have an obligation to publish the results of your experiment. We do those in primary research. We do those, in some kind of a scientific journal. And so when Watson and Crick discovered the structure of DNA, the first thing they did is they wrote it up in Nature. And what that allows other scientists to do is to repeat their experiment. And that's how science builds itself. And so if you've ever wondered how a science book is
I
made,
have
a science book is made by
Fantastic.
scientists.
I think I'm
And those
making
scientists
America.
collect data, and that
There's
science
United
is
States.
tested by other
Where's
scientists
Canada?
over and over and over again, and eventually we have the truth. And that's what science is, and it's a lot different from the
Okay.
disciplines that you
Or a
have.
wonder.
The nice thing about science is that other scientists are always trying to prove other scientists wrong. And so by doing that, it's this wonderful check and balance.
It all says hello. There's a president. The president has me here. Everybody.
So that's
Everybody
scientific method,
for one?
and I hope that's helpful.